Welcome back to the Fantasy Formula, and the championship battle is heating up both on track and in F1 Fantasy.
Oh, and in a F1 fantasy weekend like that, we really need to set the record straight back from Qatar. Can McLaren bounce back?
The last sprint weekend of the season starts right now. So, Zach, the big question heading into the weekend is which driver should we trust with our DRS boost? Now, the top 500 in the Global League were split right down the middle in Las Vegas, and the outcomes couldn't be any more different. Max won the race, he got the fastest lap, and he got driver of the day. Meanwhile, Norris crossed the line P2 and was later disqualified due to illegal plank wear. So a huge spread between the scores of those two top drivers.
Yeah, and heading into this weekend, it really does look like it's between who do you trust, the car or the driver. We know Verstappen's been good here before in the history of being at Qatar. And we also know it's probably a track that probably favours the McLaren heading into this race weekend. So for me, I think I'm a little bit more on Norris being my 2x option boost at the minute, purely because if they could have caught up that much ground in somewhere like Vegas, it makes me feel a little bit more comfortable about them being quite quick in Qatar, even with the DSQ. But it's such a shame. Never count out Max Verstappen. It's much easier if you can afford Norris and Verstappen in your team. However, that is a luxury that not everyone can afford right now.
And Zach, you can see on the screen here that Max has outscored Lando in 7 of the 8 races since the summer break. And you mentioned a moment ago, he's won 2 in a row in Qatar, both of them from pole. So it feels like he has the momentum to start the week. And certainly when you sum all of these scores up, since that summer break, Max has 340 points and Lando has 153 fantasy points. So big turn from Max, but Lando's also had some of this bad luck that's afflicted him. So he's not as bad as that points discrepancy might look. When we look at Lando, he's on 3 straight pole positions, so he's definitely got the pace, but he leads the championship also by 24 points. And if he leaves this weekend up 26 points, he wins the title, and I think he's going to win driver of the day for it too. So there's definitely a lot of momentum for both drivers heading into this weekend, and only free practice 1 and the sprint qualifying for us to figure out which will be the best.
And I actually want to highlight a stat that we got from Vegas to really show how important it is right now that we get this 2x option right. Because you take Verstappen, who got first place, over Russell, who got second place, there's a separate points of 26 points they were separated by because of the likes of fastest lap, driver of the day. All of these extra points start rolling in, and it can be a really big gap between the two drivers. So I do also agree, if Lando Norris was to get one driver of the day, his chance would be here if he does go and win the championship here. However, any situation where Verstappen's still in it, even if he's first, second, third, you could also say the same for him. So it's flip a coin and see if Lando wins the championship. If not, Verstappen will probably take the driver of the day.
We're going to have just a few data points between now and the lineup lock deadline. So like we said earlier, free practice 1 and sprint qualifying. We'll have betting lines and some of the sims from our friends at F1 Fantasy Tools. So you'll definitely want to join us for the live show this weekend because there's only a little bit of data to go off of, and we've got to lock in the best possible driver. So at this point, we've talked about the head-to-head battle between Lando Norris and Max Verstappen. But Max is tied with Oscar Piastri for P2 in the championship. We haven't talked about Oscar very much at the top of our team. He is a bit of a differential play if you have a second tier A option, but part of it is his recent form has left us with some reason to doubt him. And Dan Valente from The Score posted this morning that Oscar's the only driver in F1 history to have a streak in the same season of 8 straight podium finishes and 6 or more races without being on a podium. So it's definitely been a tale of 2 seasons for Oscar.
Wow. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all that he will be a differential option. And it really does come down to the individual of, first of all, who you can afford and who you can't afford. And like we mentioned, these upcoming sessions are going to be really important, especially, I think, Piastri. It's really sad to say this with just where his form is right now. I think it's more of a potentially Antonelli situation in Vegas where he could be a differential. If he qualifies a little bit worse than he should be, I'd still have faith in him getting back up in the field, but I can't see him winning just yet.
So Zach, continuing the theme from our Vegas live show, if you're chasing your target ranking or trying to move up in your mini league, you're going to need to take some risks. And there are only 2 races left to do it, so it's got to start right now. Where would you go first to mix it up with your team?
It has to be the 2 times option. Like I actually mentioned in the live show, at this point, again, it all depends what your rank is, what your goal individually is for the season. But if you're not where you are and you don't mind dropping an extra 1,000, 2,000, whatnot ranks, I would start with the 2 times because that is the most important option on this list. And you have to get that right, which also means it's got the most potential for upside. So we have the likes of the big 3 for me this weekend differential wise is Russell, Leclerc, Piastri. Which one of them can perform? But not even perform out of those 3, can they perform to Norris and Verstappen standards? If it looks like they potentially could, I think you could take a punt on one of them. I still think it's okay to have them as a normal just A-tier driver to have in your team, but it's risky to not put the 2 times on someone like a Norris or Verstappen because you'd still have one of them in your team over that side. And then I think if you want the middle ground of risking it but not too much, it would be the McLaren differential of not having them in your team, either having Red Bull or Ferrari. My money would still be on Red Bull as the better differential over Ferrari, just because it looks like Verstappen has the better chance of winning here, and I still haven't seen enough from Ferrari in the last few races to go near them. And then if you want a low risk sort of situation to sort out your team, let's say maybe you're 1,100th in the world and you want that tiny little differential to try and boost you into the top 1,000, this is where I'd look over to the budget drivers. And actually, I really like to look at the budget options this weekend because we have so many options where, again, budget doesn't matter too much now heading into these final races. However, we do have options where they are entirely feasible to use. Realistically, the only poisonous assets I would say would be Bortoletto and Stroll, really. And then everyone else, even Albon, needing 46 points to go up 0.6 million. I just like him because we know what Albon can do in that Williams. And then you have the likes of Lawson, Hulkenberg, Ocon. All of these drivers, correct me if I'm wrong, had less than 10-20% of people using them in the top 500 of the patrons over at F1 Fantasy Tools. So these are massive, massive differentials in the sense of just no one has them in their team. Especially keep an eye on Hulkenberg. He 100% is my big differential this weekend because I don't think more than 5% of teams will have him. And again, we've seen what Hulkenberg can do earlier in the season to potentially boost up the rankings.
One other thing I'd say here is you could actually combine strategies with some of these differentials too. You can replace McLaren with the likes of Red Bull. And then for some of us, that could open up enough budget for a Verstappen and Norris team. So that's a differential that lives underneath all of this. So something to consider for folks like me with the extra DRS boost. Imagine a 3x and 2x combination of Verstappen and Norris. So we've got to look at Oscar Piastri this weekend. And if he doesn't look great, maybe we can move off of the McLaren constructor and we can get lightning to strike twice 2 weekends in a row. Now, on that second tier A driver, a quick note on George Russell that we haven't mentioned in a while because we didn't want to jinx him, but I am going to bring it up. He still completed every racing lap this season, and that's something that's only been done 4 times in the history of the sport. That includes Piastri last season, Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and Michael Schumacher. So can he join this legendary group, or will bad luck befall him in the last 2 weekends? Now, the final mini league of the season is the Alpine Desert Dash, and it's open for Qatar and Abu Dhabi. The winner of this league is going to get a private call with either Pierre Gasly or Franco Colapinto, along with some other cool Alpine prizes. So this is another really fun F1 Fantasy Mini League. Sign up today and compete against Zach and I in our last push for F1 Fantasy Glory.
And then we have to talk about chips this weekend because it is just really, really vital, depending on how many chips you have left, what your game plan is. So straight off the bat, if you have 2 or more chips, hopefully it's just 2, not more than that, then you have to use both of them no matter what. Again, it then comes down to this ranking of, well, which chip do you use where? My ranking still is, if you've got extra DRS above anything else, use extra DRS this weekend. That's the way to go. Then it comes down to, okay, if you've still got limitless and no negative, I would probably say use no negative, my second favorite. So extra DRS top, no negative second, limitless third, and then everything else 4th, 5th, and 6th. I think wildcard is probably the only one where It still could be useful, more useful than probably if you did it for Abu Dhabi, but there's not much in it anymore just because there's not crazy amount you could change with your teams. And that will lead you straight into Abu Dhabi for whatever chip you have left because you'll just have to use that one no matter what.
If you haven't already, please make sure to like and subscribe. And of course, as we're making one last push, this is our last push to get members to the channel. Want to give a special thanks to all of those that are celebrating now their second month with the group. And also, you can get this video before anyone else, along with some unique emojis in our chat too. So make sure you check out our memberships.
Now, heading into our tier list for each asset for Qatar, we have to start with the premium drivers. Like I mentioned, again, I still think premium drivers are going to be the most important factor heading into the rest of the season for your teams, and you have to get them right. And for me, the free and the buy sections are my favorites heading into this weekend because you either have teams going Norris, Verstappen, Norris, Russell, or Verstappen, Russell. I think those are the three big teams that will probably see people going towards. Of course, Norris and Verstappen, the best way to go. Who's the two times? Well, I think for me, still, just because of Qatar, McLaren, maybe Norris, but we'll see what the sprint quali has to offer for us on any of that information. And then one key bit in the premium section, which is a little bit interesting, is the McLaren fence. And I can fully understand budgeting. It's a little bit hard for McLaren now. Again, doesn't matter too much, though. We can't take that into effect. But I can see why it'd be a little bit worrying heading into a McLaren-esque team because of what we saw last weekend. But for me, I still think they are a buy option. Purely because most weekends when nothing does go wrong, which funnily enough actually seems to be happening more often now than not, McLaren still are the favourite consistent team there for knowing that both drivers are going to be in the top 5. I then think Red Bull and Mercedes are the way to go. I don't think you can really add Ferrari into the teams anymore. It's Red Bull versus Mercedes for that next spot in your team selection. And sadly, for Lewis Hamilton, he's still in the sell category. We just haven't seen enough from him. It's just not really going the way he wants to this season. And in F1 Fantasy, it's showing that as well. Even Leclerc had a half-decent race in Vegas, but even Hamilton coming from the back of the grid into the points still couldn't outscore Leclerc in Vegas. So still think if you went for a Ferrari asset, Leclerc would be the way to go. And of course, the differential in Piastri, it's very much a differential still right now.
I agree with you, Zach. I'm happy to have McLaren on the team this week, but this is the first week we've had, maybe all season, where they're not obvious must-have constructors, especially at the very top constructor spot on your team. To put a finer point on it, V-Carbs outscored them 3 times in the second half of the season because when they're good, they're great. But their bad weeks have been really devastating. And we saw one of those in Las Vegas. And then through some of the DNFs that they had in the second half as well, they can have some really tough weekends. You mentioned Red Bull a moment ago. They have 85 or more fantasy points in 3 of the last 4 races, and they're now the hottest constructor in the game. So if you have a Red Bull Mercedes lineup, that could open up enough budget to bring in the likes of Verstappen with Norris. So now this has got me thinking that perhaps maybe McLaren aren't a must-have team and giving us a lot of other options in the midst.
Completely agree. And I actually do agree that when we add that into the equation of can you get Verstappen and Norris if you do end up going Red Bull Mercedes instead, I think especially if you've got still the 3 times left, that'd probably be the way to go.
Now, over to the Tier B assets, I'd say all bets are off. Zach mentioned a moment ago, there's only a few guys we wouldn't get into at all. Gabriel Bortoleto has 3 DNFs in 4 competitive sessions, and he's taking a 5-place grid penalty, so I'd just avoid him. But there are a few less popular drivers who I think will be okay this weekend. Fernando Alonso has 3 Q3 appearances and 3 points finishes in Qatar. Esteban Ocon, since the upgrades at the Mexican GP for Haas, he has scores of 9, 17, and 9 again in Las Vegas, so he's a reasonably priced asset that I have some good confidence in. And then among the more popular B-tier assets, Isaac Hadjar's on back-to-back double-digit fantasy scores, and I do love V-Carb again this week.
Yeah, it's such an interesting weekend for the budget drivers. I think the reason Albon's still in the sell category is just because of his price. He's so close to Antonelli in price. I'm pretty sure most of the time, if you were going that direction, you'd be able to squeeze in Antonelli over someone like an Albon, so it makes sense for that. But yeah, it's so interesting seeing how everyone's going to be individually planning, because I do think if you're trying to stay at the rank you are, steady the ship for the rest of the season, you'll see people going with like Sainz, who had a 65% ownership in Vegas, looking very good. No need to risk it there. So stick with the status quo. People like Behrman, 37%, Hadjar, over 50% as well. Even the likes of Gasly, 69%. I think those 4 drivers will be in big teams because they know they can rely on them, and most people are going to have similar drivers in their team from there. And that's where I really like that fence. The fence is the big drivers, maybe not with Yuki in there, but Lawson, Alonso, Hulkenberg, they're all very usable drivers. And in Vegas, Hulkenberg, 1% picked. If that's the same in Qatar and he ends up doing anything half decent, which to be fair, he hasn't for a while, that's why it's a differential, he could really help your season along. Lawson, 5% owned. Alonso, he's down to 20% owned. So there is just, it depends where you are again in the ranks. If you go for that differential and it's a feasible differential, it's not like a crazy shout to go with one of these 3 drivers over someone like a Sainz, then it all depends on where you are in the ranks right now.
So let's bring it all together and talk about our top lineups for Qatar this weekend. Now, this first team we've called the low-risk meta because it's bringing together the most popular drivers who have had some success over the last few race weekends. McLaren and Mercedes still owned in more than 95% of the Global League Top 500 teams, so they're the constructors to build this team with. And then Verstappen or Norris, like we talked about at the top of the show, whichever one's looking better in free practice and in spring qualifying, along with George Russell, probably the most consistent second-tier A driver you could have on your team, Hadjar and Lawson because B-Carb have been so great, and Pierre Gasly. Remember, that Alpine last year really soared in the last few races, and he's hoping to carry that momentum this year. So this team costs $135 million with Verstappen, probably a little bit more closer to $136 with Lando, but a pretty good low-risk option.
Yeah, 100%. This is the sort of team I would probably see from someone, again, like I was mentioning, where they're trying to stabilize their rank. And this would 100% be the way to go if you couldn't then afford to go to those Norris Verstappen builds still with McLaren and Mercedes.
Now, this is a team that for those of us with the extra DRS boost, we've got to consider this week because it is the moment of truth. Again, McLaren, Mercedes to start the team, but now it's Verstappen and Norris. Who gets the 3X? Who gets the 2X? Can they avoid each other on turn 1? Because you could have a huge disaster if they come together. Similar drivers in the B tier with Gasly, Alonso, and Lawson. We talked a little bit earlier about Alonso's success at this circuit. Nice and cheap and enables that budget for the 2 top tier A drivers. Now, if you bring in Red Bull for McLaren, the cost of this team would be $134.8 million versus the one you see on your screen here at $140 million. Or you could even bring that second constructor all the way down to the likes of V-Carb and really bring this into most reasonable budgets. So a lot of good options if you want to take the top 2 drivers in this race.
Now, for my little differential team heading into this race weekend, again, this is for everyone chasing points. It's in the name. It's all or nothing. I do think it wouldn't be the smartest thing to do to not go with either Verstappen or Norris as the 2 times. I still think that is a dead set until we see anything different in any of the sessions we have in the upcoming weekend. However, this team is just really interesting because you know how I was talking about those ownerships? Well, these 4 drivers paired up with Verstappen basically are the lowest ownerships of the usual 2A premium driver with 2A constructors. Piastri in Vegas, 0.6% owned. Huge differential if he stays similar in Qatar. Hulkenberg, 1%. Lawson, 5.2%. And Ocon, 11%. These drivers are not picked a lot, so if any one of them gets a considerable amount of points or doesn't get a DNF, and we see a Sainz, Hadjar, Behrman, Gasly get a DNF, you are very much sitting pretty. Again, the reason it's all or nothing is because it is more risky than the usual teams. And again, then it comes down to how safe do you feel playing it. And then you also come over to the constructors, no McLaren again. That's the big thing of all of these differential teams. You kind of have to go the non-McLaren route and hope that they don't outperform anyone. Otherwise, these differential teams just don't work.
I think it looks really good for this weekend because you said this really well in our live show, Zach. If you're just outside the top 1,000 and shooting for that top rank, if you're P2 or P3 in your mini league and trying to win, you've got to do something big. Does it matter if you drop back to a lower rank because you had a big week and it didn't work out? No. So just go with 2 races left. If you're not where you want to be, you've got to go with one of these bolder teams if you want to make those moves.
And then heading into our final team selection for Qatar, we're heading a little bit more down to more reasonable team values for anyone out there who doesn't have these big budget final pushes that you can go for. And you'll see the team does lack in some elements, but I really like the look of this team for, again, a few differentials to try to keep up with the bigger budget teams, but also keeping it grounded. Again, Norris, Verstappen, you can, depending on whatever the session's doing, you go with either one of them. Right now, we'll just call it Norris in that position right now, with Antonelli, Behrman, Sainz, Hadjar, McLaren and Racing Bulls. Like we mentioned, Racing Bulls have looked fantastic on the constructor points quite a bit of the time in the second half of the season. McLaren consistently tend to be the faster team everyone's trying to catch, but we'll see exactly what it plans out in Qatar if that is the case. We can still say they'd probably be the team most people will have. And the big one here is Antonelli. Antonelli is still in that awkward phase of just not slightly a premium driver, but just cheap enough to make these teams sort of work. And that's if you're at the low 120-ish million range. Let's say you don't have that money, you could drop down to someone like an Albon for 118.2. Or if you still need more money, you could go to an Ocon, then drops this team to 112.2. So there's a lot of variation you can do with this team. And it really is just making sure you at least have one of Norris and Verstappen as the big 2x options, and then figuring out the rest of your team as you go from there.
So there is so much to consider this weekend and so much on the line. Zach, Terry, and I are going to be here to talk to you all about it this Saturday at 8 a.m. Eastern, 1 p.m. GMT.
Hopefully, we have a little bit more practice results and sprint quali results, a little bit more useful than it was in Vegas.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you this weekend.